Hi, I'm the Girly Organist, and today I'm going to share a little bit more about my chamber opera creative process for Dear Genevieve. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I created the story for Dear Genevieve. So originally I was inspired by a solo theatre play by an artist called Teo, who did a piece of work about Samuel Coleridge Taylor. And in learning about Samuel Coleridge Taylor, I came across his daughter, Gwendolyn Avril Coleridge Taylor. I mean, that's quite a long name. And she was just like amazing. Her first composition when she was 12. She was a conductor, like did a lot of firsts in London, and all of this. She died in 1998 in Surrey, and she kind of just done loads of interesting things. But one of the things that really struck me is that she did work under her name Gwendolyn. She also did work under her name Avril, but she also did work under the name Peter Riley. And so I was looking into, like, why did she, publish music and do work under the name Peter Riley? And it's because, sadly, she was like, well, they won't publish my work always under my name because I'm a woman, but they will under my name as a man. So she had a pseudonym as Peter Riley, who she, sort of put things out there and was able to test. And that brought me to a really interesting got me really thinking about, I kind of have a pseudonym as the Girly Organist. My name's Rebecca. I have a PhD, and so I can call myself Dr. Rockpotty, and all of this sort of stuff. And thinking, like, why do we, and that works as a pro and a con. Like, why do we make these pseudonyms? Why didn't I just start off on social media as Rebecca Rockpotty or Dr. Rockpotty, or and so, like, all of this sort of hang-ups that we have around why we do these things. And I'm fully aware that in my own practice sometimes things will get published because I'm the Girly Organist, other times things will not get published because I'm the Girly Organist. Sometimes things will be published because I am Dr. Rebecca Rockpotty, other times it won't be because I am Dr. Rebecca Rockpotty. So it kind of, there's pros and cons to all these things. But one of the things that really sort of struck me is the last 2 years I have been working with some colleagues around the world on 2 book projects that are coming out this year and into next year about women composers and, well, mainly women conductors, and there's a few sort of general managers of opera companies, orchestras, and things like that. And one of the things that struck me through all of those interviews was the in-between space. Now, I've done quite a lot of study and work around space and domesticity and home, and what that looks like in music and sound and art galleries, and domesticity as a concept. And one of the things that kept coming up was, like, women being in this in-between space. And so I thought, I'm going to do some more interviews with creatives in Liverpool and in the Northwest specifically, aside from the book, about their work, and specifically asking questions about them being in between. And do we use a pseudonym because it's easier than doing it under our name because we're, like, in between spaces? So, for example, some of the stories, they've all requested to remain anonymous, which in and of itself I think is very telling. But fantastic stories of women doing creative work. But some of the stories, which are the theme of the opera, it makes up the opera. And Dear Genevieve, Gwendolyn is writing to this character, Genevieve, about these stories and these different spaces that are in between. And so some of the stories are, for example, to do with things like skin colour and not skin color in a sort of aggressive way. It's really not in an aggressive way, but just, you know, people being in a creative space and maybe feeling like they struggle to find their creative space because, you know, they're too, like, for example, too white to fit into the white culture of the like white creative spaces, but then not black enough to fit into the like black creative spaces. Another example that I had was to do with sexuality. One of the, well, there was two of the interviewees saying like they are not necessarily gay, but then also not necessarily straight. They didn't want to label themselves one way or another. And actually, because they wouldn't label themselves one thing or another thing, like they couldn't fit into the LGBTQI plus spaces easily because they would be more like overtly asked, well, are you this or that? And then they also were like, we struggle in, you know, spaces where kind of it would be maybe more traditional, and sort of saying like, because we weren't like overtly LGBT or something, like people being like, oh, this is just weird, you know, so like, so are you straight or are you not, or, you know, and that kind of like dialogue of just people wondering. And they said like, because it doesn't tick an obvious box on like you know, application forms or whatever, it's kind of, they're like advantaged, but they're both disadvantaged as well, because they're not in one camp or the other. And it, so it's just you know, really sort of I suppose really intimate, which is why I've gone for Dear Genevieve, because it's like letter writing is an intimate art form, but going sort of really intimately into you know, people's like lived experiences of not fitting in. Now we often hear about, you know, not fitting in sort of really obvious ways or exposing ways, but these are all they were all women, all of the interviews, but none of them were, yeah, they didn't want to be known, yeah, they didn't want to put their name to the interviews for fear of repercussions, which I thought is, you know, quite telling. They didn't want it to have a negative impact on them, but they were still happy to tell their stories. And it made me think like, oh, I'm a bit of a secret keeper now. But obviously they knew it was going to be used. You know, the examples are going to be used within the chamber opera. And it just a kind of really sort of, I think, the TV show Bridgerton came out during COVID, and that really struck a chord with me, because, you know, the society is just like when we look around in society today, in the UK in particular, you know, there's just people, and, you know, you don't see like color or race or age or sexuality, like we don't see these things. It's just all people, and it's about the characters of the people and their goodness and their kindness or their peevishness, and, you know, and what was really interesting is, you know, I also like things like, you know, Pride and Prejudice and Austen and things like that, is how society is so the same but different, but it's definitely different. But, you know, in the past, people would have had kind of groups that, you know, where it was kind of, oh, well, if you are like this, you know, I suppose the class system in some ways, but also, you know, but there was a kind of community around, oh, well, it's okay. So like, I'm mixed, you know, African and English, and like historically there would probably have been like layers in society where everybody that was mixed African and English could find each other, and they'd have a similar shared lived experience. And now, because everything is, you know, so sort of multicultural in the UK, that doesn't happen. And so it's like a really what kept coming up in my own experience, but also in the experiences of all these interviews, was like people longing for this space where they could be with other people that, you know, maybe also don't want to identify with a particular label. And they want to be with other people that don't identify with a particular label. Or perhaps they want to, you know, be able to spend some time with other people that they feel like are from the same mix combinations as them, etc. And a sort of real loss of this layer of society and the kind of domesticity, the home that can potentially give them. So that is where the inspiration for the actual storyline for the chamber opera has come to. Dear Genevieve is Gwendolyn writing these letters to her friend Genevieve about, you know, these experiences of being in between. So being in between spaces and places, and like how to navigate that in the creative world.